Hello, I am re-recording CIS27B Lab to demonstrate how we would be able to set up firewall, evade firewall, and set up honeypot. So refer to CIS27B Lab 8, which you can find on Canvas of your course. And let me get on to the other system and be able to screen share. So in this lab, we will be using Kali Linux. And so you can visit the site to download Kali Linux for VirtualBox. Once you have downloaded the virtual machine file, you would right-click, show more options, select 7-zip, and extract files, which I have done. And with that, I would have a folder that would contain my virtual machine. But instead of opening the folder and double click the virtual machine, we're going to go ahead and open up our VirtualBox app. In our VirtualBox app, we would then click Add. And here we would navigate to our Downloads folder, the extracted folder for VirtualBox Kali Linux. Open that up and we would load the VBox file. Now, before clicking start, we want to give our system a little bit more juice. As you see here that there's only 2 GB of RAM and 2 core for processor. So we'll go ahead and select the virtual machine and click settings. And on the settings, we would select system tab. Here we want to give it 8 GB. And keep in mind that I have a system, I'm using a system that had more than adequate RAM, so it currently has 32 GB. So I'm giving it 8 GB to the virtual machine. And then for the processor, we're gonna have the 4 core. So we want to up that to 4. Once you have set this up, we're gonna click OK and we will start. The reason why we want to give it more core and more RAM is that in the case where we're using the resources for scanning or running a certain type of application, your virtual machine would have enough resource so that way it can perform. Now, I'm using a Kali Linux virtual machine and I am setting up firewall, but I'm going to also use it to scan against the firewall. So I am attacking the same virtual machine in that sense. So that's why we want to have more than enough resources for the regular basic application. Once your VirtualBox Kali Linux is booted, we are going to go ahead and log in. So with that, I have accomplished part A of our lab to load my virtual machine and logged in. Now for the next part, as you can see here, we are working on setting up Web Application Firewall, WAF. And in this step, we're going to use ModSecurity. ModSecurity is one of the popular web application firewall that you can find, and it is open source. You can use this product on different OSs. So it is cross-platform, so you can install it on Windows, you can install it on Linux and other OS. So in Kali Linux now, in order to begin the process, I would use my terminal. So click the square icon to open your terminal. And in the terminal, we're going to push updates. So we are going to use sudo apt update. It's going to ask us for our virtual machine password or credential. So once this process is completed, we would be ready to install our Web Application Firewall. So the updates is going to run for a couple minutes. And so you always want to start your virtual machine with updates so that way it would accommodate some of the packages that you are installing in the later process. Once my update is done, I'm going to go ahead and install ModSecurity module for Apache 2. This is a web application firewall module. It requires that you run Apache 2 on the system that is accommodating ModSecurity. Now, some other web application firewall would use NGINX, which is based on Apache 2. So when you prefer to use a different type of web application firewall that's open source, make sure that you read the documentation for that package and meeting the requirements. Sometimes you have to install additional libraries. So in this case, we are going to install the Apache 2 library and with the ModSecurity module. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this command, but you can type it. And it's going to prompt me, do you want to continue to install? We're going to press Y for yes. And this process will take a few minutes. So once we have installed the Apache library with the module for ModSecurity, we're going to enable the module by using A2 and ModSecurity 2. And I want to have the sudo in the front because I'm logged in as a user, not as a super user. So I want to elevate the privilege for that. And it tells me that it's already been enabled. And since it's already enabled, I'm going to go ahead and restart Apache service. And this service is tied to the web application firewall. Now, the first step is to install the service and the firewall. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to use the configuration file of the firewall to set certain configuration for our firewall. So in the next step, I'm going to use Nano, which is a text editor, to access the configuration file of the ModSecurity firewall. And this is what it looks like. So based on the screenshot that you would see here, we want to make sure that the option for the configuration file is not commented. So we want to verify that it is enabled here. Include optional etc ModSecurity conf. So we want to make sure that we check that here. So in the configuration file, you don't need to modify much in this step. You just want to verify that the configuration file for ModSecurity is included in the option. So that is already there. What I want to do next is I want to press Control X, and I note that here. If it is the same, it's already been available. We're going to press Control X to exit, as we didn't modify anything in that step. In the next step, what we're going to do is we are going to use the MV command, and we're going to create the recommended file and then rename it as ModSecurity conf file. So we would run this command. So once that's created, we had created another file or have the file and rename it, we're going to edit the file. So in this step now, what we're going to do is we are going to access that file. And for the next step, we are going to use the configuration file to set our security engine rule and be able to set up some audit log information. So use your arrow key and we're going to move our cursor down to sec rule engine where it says detection only. We're going to take out detection only word and we're going to type on. This is going to tell ModSecurity to log all the HTTP transaction, but it doesn't take any action against potential attacks. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go down to sec audit log parts, and we want to change the value for that. The quickest way, you can use your arrow key, but the quickest way is to use the search component of Nano by pressing Control W on your keyboard. Control W will activate the search. Then we are going to search for sec audit log parts and press enter. It's going to take you directly to that entry for the configuration file. So we're going to modify the value. A, we're going to keep the same, so use your arrow key. B, we're going to keep the same. We're going to take out D, so backspace and press C. E, we're going to keep the same. F, we're going to keep the same. H, the same. We're going to take out I and replace that with a J and add in a K. And we're going to keep the Z. So that's what you would see here. So once we made the modification to sec audit log parts, we're going to press Control X and we are going to save the update information. So press Y for yes and press enter. So that would be step 23. Then for step 24, since we modified the configuration file, we are going to restart our Apache. And you can up arrow key to repeat the command that you previously ran, or you can just retype it. Next, we are going to set up the rule set. Now, the rule set is going to come from WAF, because ModSecurity is now fully maintained by WAF. So this is an additional add-on to the actual web application firewall that you have installed. So that's going to allow us to configure the rules that it would use to check against activities on our web server that we're running on this Linux machine. So in order to obtain it, we're going to download it from the GitHub. As you know here, you see that it is a compressed file, a tar.gz. So with that, we would have to decompress it. So we're going to run this command. And it's going to download the core rule set package for us. Then we're going to run a tar xvf. And we want to make sure that the version matches the version that you would see here. So v3.3.0.tar.gz. So in the future, if you download the core rule set and if the version change, you just gotta extract the appropriate version that you have downloaded. You can see that in the output from the prior step. So once that's extracted, we are going to create a directory or a folder where we're going to store our core rule set. And we simply would just do a make directory command. And we're going to name it ModSecurity-CRS. So once that directory is created, we're going to access that directory. So we're going to access or open up that folder. Then within that, we are going to rename the core rule set file. So with that, we're going to use the mv command. And we're going to call it CRS setup.conf or the conf file. Oh, let me rerun the cd command. Sorry about that. Make sure that we're in the directory. And then once we're in the directory, then we would rename the file. So I try to recreate the directory just to make sure that it's there. Then we're going to move the extracted file and rename it. Then we're going to access the directory. So you have to make sure that all the steps you follow, you cannot skip. Once we change the directory into the core rule set and the version number, we're going to access the configuration file and rename it. So once you have the configuration file, then you are going to edit it. So to use the core rule set, basically it is a template in a configuration file. We are going to first modify the ModSecurity configuration file, then we are going to modify the configuration file of the core rule set. But on the ModSecurity configuration file, we have to tell it to refer to the core rule set configuration file. So in the ModSecurity configuration file, which we have seen in the prior steps, we're going to make sure that we're going to add or modify the include optional section. So we want to go to this part of the file, and we're going to remove that, and we're going to replace it with these two lines. So use your arrow key, move down to that line where it would be the dot load. We're going to backspace it. And for me, I'm gonna go ahead and copy this, or you can type it. Just make sure that everything is correctly typed. And we're going to paste. So once I have this, I just gotta make sure that I indent and it would line up properly. Then I would save it. So after you have added those two lines or replace the old line with two lines from our lab, we're gonna do Control X, press yes to save, and enter to save the same name. Then once we have saved our file, we're gonna run a test for our web application firewall by using Apache 2 Control-T. And it would tell me, let me expand it so you can see. It would tell me that I'm lacking the server name. This is okay because we didn't really set up a domain name server. We only activated the web server, so it does look for a domain name server here. In reality, when you do this for organizations, there would be a DNS server that's tied to the web server. So what this message is telling me is that it's not determining the server functional qualified domain name because I never had a DNS. And I'm just using my loopback address to test and install my web application firewall, it's not fully deployed with the DNS. So this is why you would get this message. So it should be okay. Now, in the next part, so we would take a screenshot for lab submission. We would then need to start our Apache because we had modified the configuration file or restart it. Now we want to test to see if it's actually going to block anything. So we are going to open up our browser. And so on here, you would then open up Firefox inside your Kali machine. And then with that, we want to put in the URL that would include our domain, or in my case, I don't have a domain. I would just have a local host. And I want to use $ID equal to 3 or A is A. I wanted to see if I'm able to inject queries into my system. Now, if the firewall is working, then it's going to deny me. If my firewall is not working, then it would still load the page. So let's see. So because it is available, the firewall is available, I'm not able to connect. It rejected my request for the query, but it would keep this in the log, so you would later see the log information for this. So I would screenshot this. The page did not load. It's not supposed to load because we have our firewall blocking the request for query injection. So an attacker can inject directly into the browser. So you want to make sure that you block that with the firewall. And we would know that it is effective because we could not load the page or the request was denied. Now, next is we're going to close Firefox and back to our terminal. We're going to look at the log. And if you don't have anything logged there, you would see that it is not showing anything. Now, coming back here, we just want to make sure that we have the proper rule set up. If you have log information for the audit, it would show up. So if it's empty for now, we would not have any output here. So let me redo the part for Nano here. I'm gonna make sure I have all the rule set information. Now, if I open up my browser and see if I revisit the website with this, but instead of using HTTP, which it's gonna deny me, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the S and use only HTTP instead of HTTPS. And this is what you're supposed to get. So if you try it with HTTP, you should use HTTPS, which it's gonna block, but if you should use HTTP. And it's telling me that it is forbidden because my firewall works. So if you type HTTP and then your local host or your IP address here and try to inject these query, it's gonna deny permission to access. So you should get a forbidden message, and this is what you would see. Now, after that, let's take a look at the log. So now we're gonna come back and we're going to look at the log. And now you would have some kind of log. It tells me that there is an anomaly. There was some requests and it also denied. So it gives me information about some outbound message that it would send. So you can take a look at the log. And ideally, we would see there is an attempt in application attack. And there is denial of service protection check. It blocks and timeout. So you would see that. So that means that our firewall is working. We got a forbidden message when we're trying to inject query. Make sure that we use HTTP, not HTTPS. And when we look at the log, we would see the record of the attempt. Then in the next part, what we're going to do is we are going to set up additional rules for our firewall. And with that, we are going to access the core rule set configuration file. Now, to really get to the section, because you will find that there are many set action groups, we are going to do a search. So in step 40, in order to find that quickly, I want to search for this ID. So we would press Control W on the keyboard, and I want to search for 900130. And in that section, you just go ahead and move down to the entry where it says set action. We're going to remove the hashtag for each of the line by using the arrow key and backspace. Now, when you go to the next part where it says set var, each of the set var is a rule for application. As this is a firewall for web application, so if you want to prevent the user to run a certain application, we would then set the rule by putting each of the line here. So for example, if you look at this line, it is a rule for WordPress, and we want to prevent WordPress from being used because it is vulnerable, or you can set up a certain type of application. Now in this template, it is a template. It has these rules already been enabled or created in the configuration file. I just have to enable it by removing the comment symbol, which is the hashtag. So after I had removed the comment symbol, which is step 41, I'm going to press Control X to save and say yes, press Y and enter. So that will be step 42. Then next, what we're going to do is we are going to run the test for Apache. So I'm going to up arrow key a few times. And it's still going to display the same message because I don't have a DNS. And I'm going to go ahead and restart my Apache. So with that, we already have a rule set for our applications. And we also have the firewall activated for our web server. Then in the next part, we're going to try to scan our web server with WAF W00F WAF. And this is going to be a tool that we can use to detect web application firewall or fingerprint web application firewall. What does it do? It sends HTTP requests to the target and wait for the response. So depending on the type of firewall or if the type of response that it's gonna get, sometime you would see that it would receive a certain number of response based on the generated request. So it would log that information for you. And then if it's not successful, then it would send malicious based HTTP requests to determine if the firewall is a certain type. Now, tools like this is not 100% accurate. Sometimes it will find it, sometimes it doesn't. So we would want to run multiple type of tools. So another variation of this, you can see WAF, that's available. And there are other open source tools that you can also run. So in your terminal, we would then need to install the package and simply pulling it from the repository. Then I want to change the setup permission. And the setup is a Python file. So once we have downloaded, we would need to let me redo that step. So I'm going to go back. So before you do the git clone, let's do 45. I forgot to do that part. So change back to the home directory. Then we're going to clone. Then we're going to access the directory. Then we're going to change our permission for the setup. And then after that, we're going to run the setup and access the help option. So it gives you the details on how you can also run setup with other options. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna run the application, and our target is gonna be our own system because we're testing. So it tells me that it's checking. It gives me the information that there is a firewall, but it's not able to find exactly what it is. It did receive a code 200, so there was a successful with this request. But when it did the cross-site scripting attack, it received the 403. So it knows that the firewall is working, but it doesn't know what's the type, and the number of requests is 5. So it detects some form of web application firewall, but it doesn't detect what type. Then we are going to use Nmap script. Nmap offers a lot of the scripting engine that can be run to obtain some additional information. And in this particular command with Nmap, we are going to look for port 80 and 443. We're going to focus on HTTP and HTTPS. So, and we're going to run the web application firewall detection script for our target, which is localhost. So if you have a domain, you want to plug that in here. So it tells me that port 80 is open, 443 is closed. It didn't really find any additional information about the web application firewall, so the script did not work for that part. And then we're gonna try a second script with nmap. And you can also run it. Let's see if we can try it with the IP address, the actual IP address. So you should get the same result because it is itself. Then we're gonna run the second script for our target. And basically you're gonna get the same result. So it tells me the closed port is 443 and the open port is 480. Now, in the next part, part D, we're gonna use pwncat, pwncat. This is netcat upgrade, so it is a similar version to a tool that we previously used for scanning and determining the vulnerability of the system. This tool, pwncat, is often used for IDS, IPS, and firewall evasion. It can be used for looking at web services and things. So now we're going to install by doing sudo apt install pwncat. Then once you have the installation, we're going to change the permission. I don't think you need to do this one, so we can omit. Then for the next one, we are going to scan using pwncat for port 80, 443, and 8080. Now, when I wrote this part, I wanted for you to have some kind of output. So basically we're scanning here, very similar to netcat. So it's scanning 3 ports and it's telling me that port 80 is open, the others are not. So when you're using with the option Z, you would put in the target IP address and then following with the port number, it would scan those ports. Now, in the next part, I'm teaching you how you can scan a port range. So here we are going to use the same target and we're going to run the range. Now, executing this command will take a little longer than the previous because instead of 3 ports, we are scanning from 1 to 65,000. You can also reduce that down to less or a smaller range. Just keep in mind that, this process will take longer. We want to have a powerful system when we run these scanners, so that way your process will come back quicker, but it's also network connection and there are other factors that you have to consider. So ultimately it's gonna check for other ports that are open from 1 to 65,535. That's the port value. So as it completes, I only see that there's 1 port that's open. And so when you ran the command, the previous command here, it's looking at TCP port. And also the prior command, when you don't put any kind of option following those ports, it's going to assume that you are looking for TCP ports. Now, when we add the -U to our range, it's going to look for UDP port. So I'm gonna go ahead and up arrow key and add the -U because I'm looking for UDP ports. And again, this process will take a little longer. In the case that we are looking at 65,535 ports. So it is scanning through those. So the result of this is really depending on also your network or the target network. So if you have, if the network that you're scanning would have, you know, web services or running other services, then it's going to detect it. For example, if I'm opening browser while I'm doing that, you're going to see the different outcome here. So let's try that again. And let's say that if I open up my web server again. I'm going to reopen the page. This right here. And opening other pages to see. So as you can see, sometimes it also depends on the services and things that are enabled, right? So as we just did the range for pwncat with UDP, then you are going to do the next step where we would have a remote. Assume that we have a remote SQL server and we want to interface that with port 5000. We are going to have a remote port that is generated. So as 3306 for our local host. So we're connecting from our local host through the remote port. And when you run this command, basically it's going to listen for or it's trying to connect to a server that doesn't really exist, right? So realistically, we would put in the IP address here for our server, and the SQL server would use port 5000. We would use a remote port to connect to it with 3306. So this is going to stay open until it's reached. And in our case, it's not going to reach. So you would have to cancel the process by doing Control-C. And I put here that there's no output upon issuing the command. We activate the listener for the traffic through the remote port. Then we are going to connect using the remote SQL server port 3306 again, then we're going to use pwncat server at port 4444, but we would have to set up the server as 10.0.0.1 to bridge the traffic. And again, because this is not a realistic real system here, you won't have any output. I just want to show you how you can use the command. So Control C. Oh, we want to end this. We can open up a new. We're going to open up a new terminal for the next part, which is our last part. Now, Honeypot, you can find other products that are open source to set up Honeypot or a proprietary product. One of the popular ones that you see is Pentbox. And you need root privilege for this. So we're going to do sudo su. Put in our password. I must have mistyped that. So once I'm on sroot, I'm going to go ahead and clone the repository for Pentbox. Okay. Once that's done, because it is a zip file or a compressed file, I'm going to go ahead and go into the directory first and extract it. And you can always do ls if you're not sure. So it shows me that it is a tar.gz file. So I have to run the tar command to extract it. Once it's extracted, we would then list it. So ls to see the content. We would then look at the version. So it is version 1.8 like I note here. But if you do this in the future, if they change the version, make sure that you access the directory for that version. So we're going to do cd Pentbox -1.8. And we're going to list the content. So now we're going to run the .rb file. So you simply do a ./pentbox.rb. So this is going to use shell script to compile and run your program. So this is the menu for Pentbox. We're going to select option 2. So at the arrow, type 2. And then here we want to use Honeypot, so option 3. And normally, if you already have a web server running, fast auto configuration will not work. So you can try it. 1, nothing. So we would then try again. Option 2 for network, 3 for Honeypot. And we want to do a manual for 2. So it tells me insert the port number. We're going to use port 8080. Insert false message. It just says my Honeypot. And we want to save log with instruction. Yes. So it tells me here that this is where my default log file, the text would be. So if you want a certain name, log file name for incremental, the default is this. So we can say log Honeypot lab A Do you want to activate the V? Why not? Say yes. So now it is activated at port 8080. So we're going to go ahead and open up our browser. We're going to do HTTP 127.0.0.1, and we want to use port 8080. And it shows that, hey, this is my honeypot. So that worked. I'm able to see the honeypot message. Now, if it didn't work for you, that you didn't load, maybe you didn't have it set up properly. But we should use the option 2 manual and go through the steps. I would note that here, that we had gone through the manual options. We would select, select option 2 for manual, and then you're going to insert the port. Once you insert the port number, then you would put in the message. So insert false. And then for the next part, we're going to save the log file instruction. So to save log file instruction. Then you would go to, for the file name, enter file name, lab 8 honeypot log. Then you would open up your browser. So with that, we would be able to see, if we come back here, we put in our IP address and the port 8080. It should show you honeypot. Now, if you didn't have this, it's because you didn't fully set it up properly. So with that, we would see that I had connected to my honeypot using the browser again here. So it keeps track of it. So you would see that on your terminal as it goes. So this will stay on. And that would conclude our lab. So at that point, we want to take screen capture of our browser and our terminal. And then showing the log, get a screen capture. How can you determine if the honeypot's running? Well, if it loads the page and it says my honeypot on it or welcome to my honeypot, you would see it. And also the log information here, it shows intrusion attempted. And then what should you access to gather the information for analysis in the honeypot? Well, we can see the timestamp, where that's coming from. And then you would need to answer these questions. What did you learn about Web Application Firewall and Firewall Invasion upon completing this lab? What did you learn about honeypot upon completing this lab, and what kind of challenges you have with the lab? Now, I also want to note that when you get to the end of part D, if your virtual machine cannot download Pentbox when you go to part E, I would suggest you reboot your virtual machine. And once you reboot, repeat step 62, then go to step 63. I noticed that in class, some students, they had issues with losing internet connection. So reboot the virtual machine, and then before you begin part E. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for watching this video. And I hope that you're able to understand and learn how to set up Web Application Firewall, be able to scan against it, and set up your honeypot.